Today we're going to be talking about how to force things into your life a little bit. I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to support the channel, link in the description of the Patreon, where you can get exclusive access to videos early, Patreon exclusive content, and the Occultic Manual series, which I aim at being more instructional than what I have here on the channel, but less unapproachable than some of the old grimoires I like to talk about on the channel. If any of that sounds of interest to you, link in the description. Hope to see you all there. Really supports the channel and keeps the content flowing. One of the most powerful magical tools that we kind of shun away from in the modern world is binding spells. Binding spells are usually ridiculed, ostracized, and avoided by the general magical populace. Most of the occult world will say, well, most of the modern occult world will say that binding spells should not be done. If you want to bind something to you, you are forcing it to manifest into your life. If you are binding yourself from something, you are forcing it out of your life, right? If you want money, you can bind yourself to making a certain amount of money per year, though the effects of that will vary. Depends on how you do the binding spell, and sometimes the binding will not actually work properly and you'll get less than what you want, or it will take a long period of time. Similarly, love magic is normally said to be something that you should not use binding spells for. However, they can be useful for improving your relationship and making it so your relationship with individual people is better. As long as you are not forcing somebody to love you, then it usually is fine to do some kind of love binding, especially on someone who is just generally your soulmate, so that you don't need to worry about actually, targeting a specific person. Now, binding spells are all under the purview of the planetary power of Saturn. You could make the argument that every single planetary power has its own specific type of magic that it is best at. However, it is unequivocal that Saturn is the binding planet. Saturn is going to allow you to bind any and all things to yourself, and it is going to allow you to bind any and all things away from yourself, right? Within reason. One of the reasons that Saturn is the binding planet is because you can't just bind yourself from things that are going to be inevitable, right? Everything is going to eventually decay and die, and so if you try to bind yourself from dying, you are eventually going to find that that binding spell is eventually going to weaken over time, or you are bound from dying and you end up going to the natural lifespan of most humans. One of the interesting things is that when you are going ahead and binding yourself to a particular thing, you want to make sure that you actually are doing something proper. You don't want to bind yourself to something you think you want. You want to bind yourself to something you know you want. Everyone wants money, everyone wants love, but depending on how you do a binding spell for it, you might not get what you want in the way you want. You know, you could bind yourself into making 6 figures a year, and then you end up losing your job and getting a better job 3 months later that gets you 3 to 4 times what you were getting paid at your previous job, right? But in that intermittent period, you're going to have a massive problem. Binding spells I find to be one of my favorite kinds of spells for if I just want to set it and forget it, because it's basically the magical equivalent of put something on a checklist and it will manifest later. It is not going to be the most powerful form of magic. We'll eventually get there when we get there. But when it comes to the form of the magic, it is going to be the most precise, in my opinion. Some notable things people should probably be binding to themselves in the modern day are going to be physical health and fitness, prosperity, and love. Now, I say love. I mentioned you want to bind your soulmate or bind somebody who is going to love you to you, not just go ahead and try to force somebody against their will. One of the things about binding spells that people need to understand is binding spells are not permanent. If you bind the sun from, if you bind the sun from going down, well, eventually you're going to need to fix that. There is Buddhist stories about the sun stopping in the middle of the sky, and then the Buddhist monk proceeds to, oh, yeah, I should probably fix that, and undoes the binding. That entire example was a fictional example, or at least to my knowledge it is, but it is worth keeping in mind because of the metaphysical ramifications. Bindings need to be undone at some point. You can't just keep something permanently bound in chains. Everything yearns for freedom, and this is where we get the push and pull of freedom versus restriction. We are restricting the magic to flow into a particular thing. We are restricting events to flow in a particular way. This is the nature of binding spells. Now, binding spells are always going to be a controversial topic by people who do not have a good relationship with the planetary power of Saturn. If you tell somebody that they should do a binding spell to bind wealth and prosperity to them, they're probably going to look at you very confused. Now, if you tell somebody to make a binding talisman for wealth to bind it to the person who is wearing it, there's probably going to be a much better reaction. In general, people do not like to bind things to themselves because we have been taught in the modern era that restrictions and obligations are negative. However, one thing that we don't seem to realize is that when we are making talismans, we are imbuing magical energy into the talisman and binding it. We are creating a solid form of that magical energy, and as such, we are going to want to keep in mind that one of the things I've been trying to keep and reinforce is that that magical energy will, over time, decay. Now, this is not always the case, but generally speaking, the more powerful and the stronger you make things, the better and longer lasting the binding and talismans are going to be. This is just a quality assurance thing, but it is worth paying attention to so you don't rush. If you're going to be using a talisman for the rest of your life, you should probably make it out of something a little bit more stable than, cardstock, because that will eventually become damaged over time. You might bend it in your wallet, various other things. So it is worth paying attention to that. Now, step one for good binding spells is, of course, going to be develop your relationship with Saturn, which, depending on who you are, this is going to be easier or harder. If you have a good relationship with Saturn already, congratulations. Some of us need a little bit of work with that, so we're going to want to do some invocations of Saturn on Saturdays to learn how to most effectively do those. Now, you're going to want to do this after you've learned how to meditate and actually hear spirits, because if you don't, you're gonna kind of have a problem. The best way to do this is Saturn remediation, which is going to be cleaning and organizing your space and setting schedules and just generally restricting yourself into better life habits. Personally, I find that to be the best method anyways. You should probably be working with Saturn a little bit at the beginning of your practice just to familiarize yourself with the boogeyman of the planetary powers. But yeah. I have been Dave the Amateur Magus. Hope you guys are having a good day. If you're not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy, take care, and I will see you next time.